Is there any really good evidence for the pre-trib rapture? That's what I want to talk about today, guys. This is the Bible Explained. I'm Josh Barnes, looking forward to diving into Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 with you today. I think these are the only passages that talk about the rapture, and even people who agree with the pre-trib rapture, well, there's a big 50-50 split on whether Matthew 24 is actually talking about the rapture when it says two will be in a field, one will be taken, the other left. I have changed my position on this more than once as I've studied this, and I've come to a conclusion that I think I can defend. I want to talk today about why I think it is actually very reasonable, after carefully examining the text in Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 4, I think that the reasonable position to hold is what is classically called pre-trib rapture. I do believe that. I'm going to let you know up front that's my conclusion, but I'm going to explain to you why I reject many of the classic arguments for the pre-trib rapture, why I reject those, and I'm going to interact with mid-trib arguments, post-trib arguments, and weaknesses, and maybe even we might get into pre-wrath a little bit, some of the different views on the rapture. When does the rapture happen? If you're a little confused, hang in there. We're going to start with a definition. I'm just letting you know what our goals are for today for the live stream. Thanks for joining us, by the way, and type your comments into the box below. If you ask a question, put a big Q, capital Q, before the question, and we'll get to that. We want to get to also talking about postmillennial views on the end of Matthew 24, because I have so far been following this premillennial versus postmillennial debate through the book of Daniel and the first half of the Olivette Discourse in Matthew 24. Now we're coming to the last half, and we're really getting into the nitty-gritty, the in-house of the in-house debate. We're going, we're all... we're debating against Christian people, right? These are Christian views, and then within the Christian views, we debate over premillennial versus postmillennial, and then within premillennialism, we debate over when does the rapture happen, and really even that's within dispensational premillennialism, and so we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but we're going to also respond to some postmillennial stuff here at the end of Matthew 24. The big question, the main question we want to ask is, does Matthew 24 and the Olivette Discourse actually talk about the rapture, or is the taking, the one being taken, the other left, is that someone being taken for judgment when Christ returns? Which thing is happening here? Postmillennials will say it was fulfilled, and it was the people being taken for judgment when Jesus caused the Romans to come and attack the city of Jerusalem. That was Christ returning in judgment. So there's your there's our introduction. Let's dive into definitions of these things just to get you up to speed. By the way, this is number 7, I think, in a series of live streams where I'm walking carefully through the debated subjects of eschatology, or the end times, and doing it by carefully examining the 4 prophets that directly speak to the order of events in eschatology. Here's the thing, there's a lot of prophecy about the end times in the Bible, but only 4 prophets that are directly giving us intentional timelines, intentionally giving us this thing happens and then that thing happens in this order. They are Daniel, Jesus in the Olivette Discourse, Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5, and 2 Thessalonians 1 and 2, and John in the Revelation. All the other prophecies are just they're not very descriptive. They're this thing will happen, that thing will happen. Those 4 prophets are actually giving us prophecy that gives us an order. So when we're dealing with the order of things, we really need to go to those 4 prophets. And so that's why I've carefully examined the prophecies of Daniel, and in our previous live streams, and in our last live stream, we did the first half of the Olivette Discourse up through verse 35. So that's where we're going to pick up. Let me give you just a quick review to show you where we're at, and let's talk about what is premillennialism versus postmillennialism, and then what are the different views of the rapture that we're going to talk about. Let's start with premillennialism. This is probably the most popular thing out there. I'm going to put it up here on your screen. Here's your standard premillennial view. Standard premillennialism is going to say, right now, we are not in the millennium. So in Revelation chapter 20, we have the millennium described. Christ returns, and there's a millennial reign. So premillennialism says that that is in the future. Right now, you can see there. Here's present day, and in the future, at some point, most premillennials are going to say there's a 7-year period of time right before Jesus returns that fulfills prophecy from Daniel 9, and then Jesus will return. So there's 7 years. People often call that the tribulation. And then Jesus returns. And then there's 1,000 years where he reigns on this earth. And then premillennials generally will agree that the earth is remade and we go on for eternity in a new heaven and a new earth. All right, there's premillennialism. Now, so premillennialism says the millennium talked about in Revelation 20 has not happened yet. It's happening after Jesus returns, and Jesus hasn't returned yet. Now, let me pull up Postmillennialism, and you can see there on our screen the baptism of Jesus, and all the way through Acts 10 is really what they'll say fulfilled that 7 years. Those 7 years are already done. All the tribulation that people say will happen in the 7 years really didn't happen in those 7 years. It happened in 70 AD. And so all of the prophecy and all those things that we call end times prophecies are already fulfilled according to postmillennialism. And we are right now in a long period of time that can be represented by figuratively 1,000 years. So we are in the millennium now, even though it doesn't have to be 1,000 years. And that will end when Christ returns. It won't begin when he returns. So that's why they call it post-millennialism. So post-millennialism says we're in the millennium right now. And once we conquer the world with the gospel, once the world is evangelized and Christianized, that's when Christ returns. So postmillennials usually will say that Christ is going to be returning in maybe 1,000 years, 2,000 years from now. It's not going to be anytime soon. It's a long time from now because there's a lot of unbelief on the earth, and the whole earth has to be Christianized before Christ returns. Premillennials say, okay, we're going to do the best we can to bring the world to faith in Christ, but we're not waiting to get everyone saved for Christ to return. We know he could return anytime. And there is really a very key difference between premillennialism and postmillennialism. Premillennialism is very much, they believe in imminence, meaning Christ could return at any time. And postmillennialism does not believe in imminence. That is not a part of postmillennial theology. It can't be any time. It has to be once the world is Christianized. And all of Christ's enemies are put under his feet, which is the exact opposite of imminence. You really can't put those two together. So those are your two views in general. We spent a lot of time talking about premillennialism versus postmillennialism. I think I've given a very robust, a very solid argument to show that postmillennialism doesn't work. If you want to go back and review that, we've done 7 live streams now. I'm going to talk about it a little bit today, but we're going to focus on the in-house debate inside of premillennialism. And so if we go to premillennialism, we can, let me go back to that premillennial chart here. Here we go. Okay, so you can see right there between the present day and Jesus returns is that little period of time called, I've listed 7 years, the tribulation. Now, the Bible never calls it the tribulation, not once. It says there will be great tribulation in the last half of those years, but it never calls the 7 years the tribulation. That's just something we use to designate it. So in that period of 7 years, at what point does the rapture happen? You say, what's the rapture? Well, let's pull that up here. There we go. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and here's where we get our word rapture from. It says, "But I would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. This is the statement. This caught up together with them to meet the Lord in the clouds. Caught up is translated from a Greek word, which I'm trying to highlight that. There we go. Caught up. So frustrating. Harpazo. It's a Greek word. It's translated from a Greek word, harpazo, and harpazo was translated in the Latin Vulgate translation as raptura or rapier. At any rate, there's different forms of it, but raptura is the base word, and raptura is where we get the word rapture. It just means to be caught up, okay? So when we say rapture, we're referring to 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 17, and when will this thing happen? This, we which are alive and remain are caught up together to meet the Lord there. When will that happen is really the question. All right, so as we talk about that question, let me show you the different views within premillennialism about the answer. Here we go. Another chart for you. Okay, the timing of the rapture. Oh no, wasn't supposed to go like that. Let me go here. Here we go. There we go. Okay, timing of the rapture. You got to see some of my slides ahead of time. There we go. So you can see that there are different views here. There's the pre-trib rapture. And that starts, now you've seen it on this chart, you could tell if you're looking at it. I've broken the chart up into 7 years, right? First year, second year, third year, fourth year. Fourth year would be in your halfway point, 3.5 years, then 3.5 years, right? So this would be a representation of those 7 years. At the beginning of the 7 years, before it all starts, before the 7 years starts, that would be called a pre-trib rapture because people call it the tribulation. And so we say then we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, before the tribulation. Then you see right there in the middle is another view. It's called the mid-trib rapture. And you can imagine why it got that name, because it essentially you believe that if you're a mid-trib rapture guy, you believe that the rapture will take place in the middle of those 7 years, right before the abomination of desolation. Now, we talked about this before. The abomination of desolation is... we'll talk more about this when we get to our next stream, which is 2 Thessalonians chapters 1 and 2, and we'll talk a lot about the abomination of desolation in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and 2, so join us for that. But essentially, if I can just sort of skip ahead and not show you my work for now, because I'll show it to you next month, the abomination of desolation is the Antichrist coming into the temple of God and claiming to be God, setting up his image there and forcing everybody to take the mark of the beast. So right before that, if you believe the rapture takes place right before that, you have a mid-tribulation rapture. I think this is a difficult one to show, but it works. It has less problems than many of the other views. So mid-trib is actually not a terrible view. It's just, well, we'll talk about its strengths and weaknesses in a little bit. Pre-wrath, that's when you believe that the wrath of God really comes in the tribulation in the last few months. And so a pre-wrath says, oh no, the rapture takes place just a few months before Jesus returns because he pours out his wrath in the bowl judgment in Revelation chapters 15 and 16, I believe. And so he pours out his wrath in the bowl judgments. And so, but he takes his people off the earth before that wrath is poured out, and then he returns at the end. I think that's probably the weakest of all the arguments, and it has very little support, and it has many weaknesses. And then you have the post-tribulation rapture, which posits that no, Jesus doesn't come more than once and take people out. He returns, and he returns at the end of the 7 years. And when he returns, we are caught up together to meet him in the air as he's returning, so that we can return with him and conquer the earth with him. So there's some big problems with all of these, except I think there's one view here that is very robust. And I think I'm going to posit this ahead of time, and you see if you agree with me by the time we're done. But the pre-trib rapture is like, it's like one of those, I'm gonna show that I know nothing about boxing, but it's like he can juke, right? I mean, like he can when when a punch is thrown his way, he's able to dodge out of the way. The pre-trib rapture is a very robust view because it really is able to sidestep all the problems that I'm going to point out with the other views, and it stays standing. It's kind of hard to disprove, and so this is why it's been so pervasive, I think, and why people have kind of glommed onto it. Even though I think for the most part in America, the pre-trib view has had really bad argumentation. I am not a big fan of Tim LaHaye. I'm not a big fan of Hal Lindsey. And I'm sorry for those who are. We can still be friends, okay? But I really don't think they had very good arguments. And I've said this several times in some of my previous videos, that things like, the 7 churches of Revelation are 7 ages of church history. This is just not. There's not good argumentation for this. It's actually kind of silly. The idea that there are that the second Thessalonians chapter 2, which says there's an apostasia, a falling away, that's the rapture. That's just it's ignoring the context of the passage. So I'm getting all the pre-trib rapture guys mad at me. That's okay. Everybody's going to be mad at me by the end. I think those are bad arguments, but let me show you what I think is a really good argument. And let's do that by studying Matthew 24. So I've given you sort of like the setup, okay? The definitions of everything. Now let's do just a little bit of a review of Matthew 24 and look at what we've found so far. So in our last stream, we talked a lot about the differences between premillennialism and postmillennialism in Matthew 24 verses 1 through 35. So we talked about the argument from postmillennialism is this is all fulfilled already. They have to say that because if there's anything left to be fulfilled in the future, it messes up the whole postmillennial view. Postmillennialism says all that's all done. All we're doing is bringing the world to Christianity so Christ can return. That's the only thing left is Christ's return. All the other prophecies are already fulfilled. Well, premillennialism says, yeah, this is talking about 2 things. Matthew 24 is talking about 2 things. It's talking about one fulfillment in 70 AD when the temple was going to be destroyed. But it's clear that not all of it was fulfilled in 70 AD. More of it is that it needs to have a second fulfillment that accomplishes all of the prophecy. So then you have phrases like this generation and so on and so forth, where Jesus is showing that Matthew 24 is talking about something that's going to happen during that first century, within 30 or 40 years of Christ. And you also have statements like verse 31, which can only be explained if you say that there's 2 things happening in Matthew 24. Okay, so go back and watch my live stream if you want to get deeper on this. I'm going to kind of like skim through this because I don't want to spend all of our time on review. But just really quickly, I want to show you a couple things, and then one or two things that I didn't mention last time that I thought would be good to include this time. Okay, look at verse 31. Okay, this prophecy in Matthew 24, remember that postmillennials say this is all about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD. Well, how could that be? Verse 31 says, "And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other." From one end of heaven to the other. This is a worldwide gathering of the elect. This can't be something that has already this did not happen in 70 AD. Now, I'm sure somewhere, someplace, there's some postmillennial who's come up with some kind of answer for verse 31, but I have not found it. And I have several books from postmillennials, Greg Bonson. I've watched lots of sermons from postmillennials, and I have not yet found them dealing with this. This verse seems to very obviously be end times. When Christ returns, he sends his angels with the sound of a great trumpet. So if you admit that this verse is about the end times, then the entire context of Matthew 24 can't be just about 70 AD, 2,000 years ago, right? Even though it is talking about Jerusalem being destroyed, that's how it starts in verses 1 through 4, right? Jesus said, there will not be left one stone upon another when he's talking about the temple. Yeah, that's the destruction of Jerusalem. But he uses it to talk about something that has to be fulfilled more than once. It's not just talking about that. It has to be more than that because verse 31 makes that really inescapable. I don't know how a postmillennial would answer that because I have not found an argument from postmillennials yet. Maybe I will. If you have one, send it my way. Okay, so let's continue on. So I think that shows us, at least that's a really good way to just show that in Matthew 24, what we have is Jesus talking to his disciples, and he's telling them about how Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and it will be in 70 AD. And he's also telling them about how he's using that and launching from that prophecy of 70 AD into prophecy about the end times. And the reason is probably because, well, first of all, because they're designed to look similarly, those two things, the destruction of Jerusalem and Christ returning at the end. And because the disciples asked him about both of those things. As he sat upon, they said, when shall these things be, meaning the destruction of Jerusalem that Jesus just spoke about in verse 2, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So they were asking him about the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world, and Jesus was answering both of those questions. So two things are happening in Matthew 24. Okay, so there's two things I wanted to just talk about real quick before we jump into the rapture. I know you guys came here for the rapture talk. I get it, but there's two things I want to say just to wrap up our postmillennial thing. And one thing in particular, and this was mentioned in the comments last time, and I was like, man, I wish I had talked about that, and I'm sorry I didn't get around to it, guys. This is verse 14. This is a very interesting verse. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Now, postmillennials will say this was fulfilled before the end there that it's talking about, then shall the end come, is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Before Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 AD, the gospel will be preached in all the world, and they'll say it's going to be spread throughout the Roman Empire. Paul said that he's preached to all nations and all kinds of different kinds of people, and so it's spread through all the world before 70 AD. But postmillennials also say another thing that is very contradictory. In fact, I think it was R.C. Sproul who said that this is the most convincing postmillennial verse he's ever read. It's Matthew 10:23. Let me pull it up. Matthew 10:23. He said, this is the most convincing postmillennial verse I've ever read. I believe that's a direct quote, although I think I quoted it from Jeff Durbin, so I'd have to go back and see if Sproul actually said this. But it's this verse, when they persecute you in this city, flee into the another. For verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. See, you won't hit all the cities of Israel until the Son of Man come. But then in chapter 24, he says, but this gospel will go into all the world, and then shall the end come, which is the Son of Man coming in judgment on Jerusalem. Which one is which? Well, obviously Matthew 10 is talking about Jesus coming behind his disciples. He's sending them ahead on a couple-week mission, and he's coming behind them because he's in a hurry to get to Jerusalem because he's going to be there for a feast. And so you guys go ahead of me. I'm going to try to hit a lot of towns. Don't spend too much time in each town because I'm going to get there before you leave. You need to be gone so I can get there, preach, and go on. You're preparing the way for me, right? So again, postmillennials can be pretty inconsistent here. But seeing as this is not talking about the Son of Man coming at the end times or in 70 AD, then we go to Matthew chapter 24 again. We look at verse 14 and we say, oh, this might not be talking about coming. Then shall the end come. The gospel has to be preached in all the world. Then shall the end come. It also seems to be talking about the end times. Anyway, postmillennial views need to at least be consistent, and they need to be robust and careful. They can get sloppy as well as any other view. All right, so now we've laid out the groundwork here. If I'm going too fast, I'm sorry. It'll just force you to go back and and watch the video again. By the way, don't forget, our moderator is watching for your questions. He's gathering them all up, and he's going to send them to me by the end of the stream, so that way I can respond to them. So I do plan to respond. If you ask a question, you might the moderator might wait to send it to me until after he sees if I answer that question. So let's get to it. Here's the kicker. Here we go. We're half an hour in, and we're finally getting to the rapture. I'm sorry, guys. Verse 36, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. Okay, big question here, and this is disagreed upon among premillennials. It's certainly disagreed. Postmillennial will typically say this is not talking about the rapture. Sometimes they will say that it's talking about the rapture. All the different views are going to disagree on this. The only one that's really doesn't even disagree within their view is the postmillennials, which all say, yeah, this is just talking about Christ coming in 70 AD. Everything's 70 AD for postmillennials. Christ came in 70 AD and took the wicked and for persecution and for judgment, and the righteous stayed behind, which doesn't, in my opinion, does not make a lot of sense. Right? In 70 AD, everyone who was in the city was killed. Okay? I mean, it was a massacre. It was decimated. A decimated would be reduced by 10th, so I guess it's more than that. It was demolished, right? So the idea that only the wicked were taken, 2 of them were in a field, and the Romans came through and killed just the wicked, and the others were left, it blows my mind that a postmillennial could have that view. I suppose maybe some postmillennials might come up with some other answer there, but I can't think of one. And I'll tell you in a minute. I'll play you a little clip from Jeff Durbin about Noah and what he thinks about this and how he thinks this whole section is explained. But I think postmillennialism fails miserably here, because if everything's about 70 AD, why are 2 people in a field during the? I mean, why are they grinding at the mill? They have no food. You guys understand what the siege of Jerusalem was in 70 AD. It was people didn't have things to grind at the mill. Okay, they were eating their shoes because they had leather. They were eating the leather on people's clothes. They would if somebody was dying in the street, they would take that person and kill them and eat them, and then open up their stomach to see if there was anything left in their stomach. I mean, like, there was ugly, awful things happening here in the besiegement of Jerusalem. But I tell you a couple things that weren't happening. 2 women out grinding and at the mill. What are they grinding? Where are they getting food, right? And the idea that 2 of them are going to be there, and the Romans are going to come in and kill one, and kill the wicked one, and leave the righteous one, is just, come on. This is not a good interpretation of this passage. I'm gonna show you what I think is a good interpretation of it. Okay, but we need to ask a couple questions. What does the day and hour mean? What does that mean? Because it could be a day, 24 hours, and an hour, 60 minutes, or it could mean a time period. Hour is often used. Of that hour can be referred to just a time period, and of that day can refer to a time period. So day and hour doesn't necessarily mean a 24-hour day. We got to decide which one this is. Okay, so day and hour, we're going to need to decide what that is. We also need to ask the question, what does that picture of Noah mean? Does the picture of Noah give us some clue about what's going on here? Right? As the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Jeff Durbin believes that does give us a clue as to what kind of taking is happening here. One shall be taken and the other left. Okay, we're going to have to ask that question. What does the picture of Noah mean? Then we're going to need to do what is the coming of the Son of Man a reference to? We're going to need to ask that question. Here it says, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. What is that talking about? The moment, like the split second when Christ comes, the hour, the 60-minute hour when he comes, or the 24-hour day when he comes. What does it mean when it says the coming of the Son of Man? How large of a period of time is included in the coming of the Son of Man? I think that's a good question to ask. It's something we need to ask. And then what is this word taken? And this is going to be the really fun study, is the word taken. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill, one shall be taken. 2 shall be in the field, one shall be taken. The other left. Watch therefore, you know not what hour your Lord doth come. Okay, so taking. That's a very interesting word, and we're gonna have some fun with that word taken. But first, I need to show you guys something. I need to show you 1 Thessalonians 4 and why. I'm going to make a case for you, and then we'll go back and we'll analyze other views. Let me make a case that verse 36 through 42 is talking about the rapture, and that it is in fact talking about a pre-tribulation rapture, or that we should assume that it's pre-tribulation. That is our best assumption. We should certainly think that this is the most accurate argument. That's my position. I think it is the plausible explanation for verse 36 through 42 is that we have a pre-tribulation rapture here. And here's the reason why. All right. It is 1 Thessalonians 4. Let me show you why. All right. Put this up here on the screen. Again, I've got to get this to stop moving on its own. Okay, there we go. All right. So here on the screen, I've got Jesus versus Paul. Well, it's really Jesus plus Paul. Okay. My theory is this, and I don't think it's it's theory. It sounds like a theory of evolution, right? You never know if it's true or not. Here's what I'm going to posit. Here's my argument. I believe that Paul is specifically quoting Jesus in 1 Thessalonians 4. And here's the reason why. Well, let me give you my first piece of evidence to say that Paul may be quoting Jesus in 1 Thessalonians 4. All right? Look at verse 13 of 1 Thessalonians 4. But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. That's clearly talking about those who are dead. But he's using a word that Jesus introduced to talk about those who are dead, asleep. Jesus said this when Jairus' daughter was dead. He says, no, she's just sleeping. Right? That ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. All right? Verse 15. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord. Now, I think that phrase, here's what I'm going to say. I believe that this phrase, this we say to you by the word of the Lord, is Paul making an argument that he says Jesus made. He's telling the people, Jesus said this. Jesus taught this thing. Remember that Jesus told the apostles that they would get further revelation. There were things that he hadn't told them yet, that he couldn't tell them, that the Holy Spirit would reveal to them. So after Jesus' teaching, the apostles not only remembered the things that he said and wrote those down, they also brought us further teachings. This is the New Testament, right? The majority of the New Testament is the apostles' further teachings. But sometimes the apostles are repeating to us the things that Jesus said. Paul does this a lot. You can check out 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul says, as the Lord delivered to me, I'm going to deliver to you. And then he gives the statement that Jesus made at the Last Supper to tell the people about how to observe the Lord's Supper. Think about 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul says, as a matter of fact, let me just go there. 1 Corinthians, we've got time. We're not in a hurry. 1 Corinthians 7, he's talking about marriage here. And he says this, let's skip the uncomfortable parts here about the intimacy in marriage. All right. Verse 6, but I speak this by permission and not of commandment, for I would that all men were even as myself, but every man that hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that. I say therefore to the unmarried, it is good for them if they abide even as I. But if they cannot contain, let them marry. For it is better for them to marry than to burn. And unto the now look at verse 10. And unto the unmarried I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. Yet not I, but the Lord. He here is quoting Jesus, but rephrasing it. Jesus said, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Here he says, unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. He says, remember Jesus said this, let not the wife depart from her husband. But and if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Let not the husband put away his wife. This is him explaining what Jesus said. What God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Then he says, but here's what Jesus didn't talk about, so I'm going to give you more information. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. You see how Paul is saying, here I'm quoting something Jesus said. Here I'm giving you further information from the Holy Spirit that Jesus didn't speak about, right? So this is, I think we can prove that in 1 Thessalonians 4, this is exactly what Paul is doing in verse 15. He introduces this section on the rapture. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord. That indicates to us that we very well may, and I think we absolutely do, have Paul quoting something Jesus said, reminding them of something Jesus said. Now, 1 Thessalonians, we know, is the church was very into eschatology. In fact, throughout the book of 1 Thessalonians, Paul's constantly reminding them about their hope, about Christ's return, eschatology. In fact, Paul got in trouble when he founded the church of Thessalonica because the people of the city, in the book of Acts, you can read about it, said, oh, they're believing in this other king's coming, you know. And so Jesus as king and the kingdom of God is like a main, big, important thing for the people of Thessalonica. So that's going on here in Thessalonians, and he's reminding them of something Jesus said that they certainly would have already known, since Paul seemed to have talked to them a lot about the end times while he was with them. So here's my theory, that Paul is quoting and explaining and restating the things of Jesus. Now, if that's true, then we should see more than just him saying, this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, and the word taken matches kind of with the word caught up, right? Let's see what else Paul says in this passage that is similar to something Jesus has said. If it's something, maybe we have a couple different options. Either he's not actually quoting Jesus, which doesn't give us a good explanation for him saying by the word of the Lord, right? Because he's inspired by the Holy Spirit for the whole book. He's not just saying by the word of the Lord because this part's from the Lord, the rest wasn't from the Lord. He's all inspired by the Spirit to write this, right? He's saying, this we say to you by the word of the Lord because it's a quotation from Christ himself. So we really have the option that either it's a quotation from Christ that we don't have recorded anywhere else, it's not in the Olivette Discourse, it's not anywhere else, or it's a quotation that is somewhere in Christ's teaching that's recorded for us. And I think it's obviously the Olivette Discourse. All right, so let me prove that. Let me show you that this is quotations from the Olivette Discourse. Now you say, why does this matter? Well, because if Paul is talking about the rapture, that's what we mean when we talk about the rapture. We're referring to Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 17, and Paul was quoting Jesus, and if he's quoting Jesus from the Olivette Discourse, it probably means that Matthew 24 is about the rapture, whatever the rapture is, whenever it happens. And then once if I can show that, then we can determine when the rapture happens or get a general idea about it based on what we can find from these two passages, comparing them together, acknowledging that Paul, if he is quoting the Olivette Discourse, will be explaining it more to us and giving us further information and reinforcing things that maybe we might have missed just reading the Olivette Discourse. So at any rate, now let's compare these two. All right. I think I can make this case. So here we go. We'll start with verse 1 of chapter 5. Actually, I'm gonna pull this up on your screen and take me right out of it. There we go. So that way you can see both sides. All right. So verse 1 of 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul goes on after talking about the rapture. He says, but of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. Well, isn't that interesting? That seems, if he's quoting from Jesus, that might give us indication that he's quoting from the Olivette Discourse, because didn't Jesus say, but of the day and hour, verse 36, no man knoweth, knoweth no man. He says, but of the times and seasons, you know that that day of the Lord shall come as a thief in the night. Then he says, look at that. Day and hour is unknown. Times and seasons are unknown. All right. Now we have when they say peace and safety in verse 3. Isn't that what Jesus said? Look at what it says in verse 37 of Matthew 24. Rather 38. As the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in those days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay, they were eating and drinking, giving, marrying, and giving in marriage. Well, that seems like a comparison, doesn't it? When they say peace and safety, they were eating and drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. All right, let's go to the next one. We have people eating and drinking and marrying, people saying peace and safety right before destruction comes. It's exactly the same concept. Paul doesn't stop there. Look at verse 2. He says, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. Now look back at Matthew 24, verse 43. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. So we already have the day and hour is spoken to the same as the times and seasons. We have people eating and drinking and marrying before destruction comes. And when they say peace and safety, then comes sudden destruction. Now we have both of this is in both of these passages where the coming of Christ is referred to as a thief in the night. This sounds to me like when he says we say this by the word of the Lord, he's referring to the Olivette Discourse. All right, let's keep going. Now we've zoomed way out, so you can see the Olivette Discourse. You can, if you're looking at your screen, you probably can't even see that. But I'm just trying to give you a visual representation of where all these quotes are coming from. So back on the right side there, you have 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. It says in verse 3, then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child. Okay. That sounds very similar to Matthew 24, doesn't it? Because Matthew 24, verse 8, he says, all these things are the beginning of sorrows. And that word, the Greek word that Jesus used for sorrows, is the same word used for birth pains. In fact, I would say beginning of sorrows is beginning of pains of birth, where travail upon a woman with child is the end. And so Paul is using the same analogy, only he's talking about the end versus the beginning. Either way, you have a very similar analogy, which adds to this argument that when Paul says this, we say to you by the word of the Lord, he's not saying something that's not recorded for us. He's talking about the Olivette Discourse. So we have now a fourth quotation, the day and the hour, the times and seasons, the eating, drinking, and marrying, peace and safety, thief and thief, birth pains, travail on a woman with child. Let's look at another one. We're not done. We only have 4. And we've got several more to go. 2 more, actually. Verse 6, therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Well, this is very similar to what Jesus says in chapter 25 in the Olivette Discourse, in Matthew 25. What does he say? Well, in Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, he gives the parable of the virgins, and you can't even see it in that picture. I just want to show you where it comes from all different places throughout the Olivette Discourse, these quotations that Paul is pulling from. And in Matthew 25, he says that there's these virgins who are not ready for the coming of Christ. And, oh man, there it goes. It goes moving on its own for me. Okay. These virgins that are not ready for the coming of Christ, and they are sleeping, but they're sleeping unprepared. There's 10 virgins. 5 of them are sleeping but are prepared. 5 of them are sleeping but are unprepared. And when the bridegroom comes, they're not prepared, and they're found without the oil that they need. Paul is using the same analogy after he said he's quoting Jesus. I'm just saying, like, I think this is pretty substantial evidence. You must watch and not sleep like unready bridesmaids, Jesus, Matthew 25, but in the Olivette Discourse. Paul says, therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Okay? We're not even done yet. Here's the highlight. This we say to you by the word of the Lord. Paul said that he was talking about something Jesus said, and it's very clear that he's talking about the Olivette Discourse, because everything else he says right there is all about the Olivette Discourse. And then we have caught up. We have the word caught up in verse 17. And I say to you, I believe this is a parallel to the word taken in verse 30. Where are we? Yeah, verse 40. It's hard to see that little tiny thing, right? All right, so let's go. Let's examine caught up versus taken. All right, so here's a couple arguments. Let me pull up the Matthew 24 so we can examine the word taken there in Matthew 24. Here we go. All right, so Matthew 24, verse 40 through 42. Two shall be in the field, one shall be taken, and the other left. Okay? Some are going to argue that this is going to be talking about taken for judgment. All right? Now, Paul is clearly not talking about being taken for judgment when he says caught up, right? I mean, look at the context of Paul. When Paul says you're going to be caught up, we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of Christ shall not prevent them which are asleep. He says this is something, verse 18, wherefore comfort one another with these words. Hey, these are clearly believers who are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord, and those who are asleep, that's clearly believers. Believers are asleep, but they will come to life again later, right? Their bodies are asleep, their souls are with God, their bodies will come back. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them. We, that's clearly those who are believers, right? We, Paul's including himself, we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. So this is clearly a taking that is a positive taking. We're taken to be with the Lord, and we're comforted by the fact that we will be with the Lord in this taking. Now, if Paul is quoting Jesus from the Olivette Discourse and restating it, then this caught up is probably the same as Christ's taken. Okay, there's my first piece of evidence that Matthew 24 is in fact talking about the rapture. I have additional evidence. We're going to talk about Noah, the time of Noah, in just a moment. Let me get to that. But remember that the argument for against it being the taken in verses 40 and 41 in Matthew chapter 24, the argument against that being the rapture is this is a taking for judgment. Remember, the angels in verse 31 gather people up and they bring them because it's the end of the world. Remember, who are they gathering up when they bring at the end of the world? Well, it's the elect, guys. That's not people being taken for judgment either. Okay? But the argument against this being the rapture is, oh no, this is being taken for judgment. Now, we'll talk about why they say that from Noah in just a moment, but let's look at the word taken and see if we should conclude that. Okay, so Matthew 24 does not use the same Greek word for taken as Paul uses in 1 Thessalonians 4 for rapture or for caught away. All right, let me give this to you. I want to make sure I get these right. Don't get them back. Paralambano is the word that Jesus uses for taken. Paul uses harpazo. So harpazo, caught up. Paralambano, taken. Now, you say, well, taken, that has to be taken for judgment. You're coming with me and you're going to be judged. That is not what paralambano means. Guys, paralambano is used, let me see how many times, if I make sure I get this right. Something like 50 times. I think it's 50 times in the New Testament. Paralambano is found. Every time it's talking about a voluntary going with somebody. every time. You've got two different, essentially it's used in two different ways. Mostly it's talking about taking a bride. So Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary to you to be your wife, or taking a friend with you on a journey. Like, come along with me, we're going on a journey. Come. No, in no case is paralambano that I've been able to find used in a you are coming with me whether you like it or not. It's always a voluntary taking. In fact, the meaning is really to receive. Like, I'm going to receive you here. It's not I'm taking you and you're coming with me. Now, if Jesus is talking about a involuntary taking to judgment, that would be, he really should have used harpazo. Because harpazo, that the word that Paul uses in 1 Thessalonians, means to seize, to snatch, to take by force. Harpazo means you don't have a choice, you're coming with me. Paralambano means, well, come along with me. Why don't you come with me? And I'll take you and we'll go on a journey together. Right? So it means I'm going to help you along the way. We're going together. It's a gathering together, taking. It is a receiving. I receive you to me. It's a positive thing. The only time that I could find where paralambano is used slightly negatively in the Bible, and it's not even negative, the way that the word is used, it's just a negative passage, is where where Satan says, he took Jesus up to a high mountain. He took him to a pinnacle of the temple. But you know that's not by force, you don't have a choice in the matter, because Jesus, if Satan was taking him by force, Jesus could just say no, right? Jesus is the more powerful of the two, right? So this is also used to refer to a person saying to another person, come with me and we'll go together. And he agrees to go. That's what's happening when Satan brings Jesus up to an exceeding high mountain, and it says he took him up to an exceeding high mountain. It's paralambano. Either way, paralambano is used as a voluntary going with a person, not a come here, you're coming with me whether you want to or not. That's harpazo. That's the word Paul used. Now remember, Paul is clearly talking about a good thing. In the two scenarios between harpazo and paralambano, paralambano is the one that Jesus used. Harpazo is the one that Paul used. If one of those two words was going to be talking about taking for judgment, it would be harpazo. But yet when harpazo was used by Paul, it's clearly in the context of we're going to be with Christ whether we like it or not. We're going to be with him. And it's a positive thing. And we're going to like it, right? We're comforted by the fact nothing's going to stop us. He's going to take us by force to himself. That's a positive. When Jesus uses it, the context is less obvious that it's positive. So he uses a word, paralambano, that is always a positive, voluntary coming to me. So already we have very good reason to believe, first, because Paul is quoting Jesus, we have good reason to believe then that Matthew 24, verse 40 and 41 are talking about the rapture. Secondly, because the word that Jesus used is a positive, voluntary, come with me sort of a word for taken, then we have good reason to believe that that's talking about the rapture, not taking people for judgment. Guys, we're not even done yet. This gets better. Okay, so right now we're proving that Matthew 24, I think we're proving that Matthew 24 is in fact talking about the rapture. We haven't talked about why it has to be the pre-trib rapture. We'll get there. Give me a second. Okay, we're definitely going there. But give me just a second. All right, so next I want to talk about Noah. What does this thing about Noah teach us about the rapture? Okay, the picture of Noah. All right, let me play for you what Jeff Durbin believes is the picture of Noah tells us. He believes that this is proof that that this taking has to be of unbelievers for judgment. Now, I think we've given two really, I think, really compelling reasons to think this is not talking about a taking of unbelievers for judgment. But let's let Durbin make his point. This is from a sermon. You know what? I'm going to get it to you from two sermons here. I think I can grab this real quick. Yeah, here we go. These sermons will have listed on the bottom the names of the two sermons. He says this a lot in his sermon series through Matthew 24 that I think was a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So here's just a sample of 2 times when he said something like this, where he makes the point that the taken in verse 40 and 41 can't be the rapture because of Noah. Here's him making that point.
Question, ready? Who was swept away from the earth? The righteous or the wicked? The wicked. Who remains? The righteous. So you think about ark, Noah, his family, judgment, the wicked swept away, the righteous remain. Let the text speak. In Noah's day, who was swept away? The unrighteous. The unrighteous were swept away. Who was taken and who was left? Just consider it. Who was left after the flood? Noah and his family. Who was taken away? The unrighteous. This text isn't talking about a secret rapture where Christians get taken away and unbelievers left. It's literally in the reverse. Literally the reverse. The righteous are left and the unrighteous are swept away.
Okay. I don't know if you guys can see how obvious the error is here. To me, it seems really obvious. It seems like, oh, okay, that's like right on the surface. It's pretty obvious what he's doing wrong here. So he's saying, let's go back to the text here. It says, as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So he says, listen, took them all away means taking away the wicked from the earth. Okay, we're taking off the wicked from off the face of the planet, right? But that means that when he says taken in verse 40, that's taking the wicked for judgment, right? Let me pull up this because we want to also include Luke 17. Let's go to Luke 17 real quick. I want to show you something here. Let me pull it up here on your screen because you might be thinking, well, hang on a second. Wasn't Noah taken up from the earth as well? Like, as a matter of fact, the Bible in Genesis actually refers to the ark as being lifted up from off the earth. So the ark was lifted up from off the earth while the wicked were swept away, and then they came back. That actually fits fairly well with a pre-trib rapture view, doesn't it? Because, you have judgment coming. God takes his people up from off the earth, wipes out the wicked, brings them back to possess the earth. That fits pretty well, right? And so to reinforce this, we can go to Luke 17. Let me find the exact verse here. I've got it written down. Luke 17, verses 28. Look at this. In verse 28, we have the same thing in verse 25, but first he must suffer many things, rejected of this generation. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, the flood came and destroyed them all. See, here he doesn't say take them all away. He says destroyed them all. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat and they drank, and they bought, they sold, they planted, and they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So he adds in Luke the picture of Lot. What's the picture of Lot? Lot is leaving Sodom so that he's not in the judgment that comes on Sodom. So wiping out the people, he takes his people out, he wipes out the people, okay? This is similar to Noah, where he takes Noah out, wipes out the people, right? So so then does this prove postmillennialism? Well, no. When you look at Luke, it makes it pretty clear that the taking is the taking of the righteous out, so that when the judgment comes on the unrighteous, they're not a part of it. So that seems to be the case. Let me just look at this real quick, and then we'll go on to. Okay. So one of the things I have so many things to say. I've got to keep looking at my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting something. Okay. So one of the things that we need to remember is that when we're talking about the flood, the flood. Remember how Noah was told to go into the ark? I don't know if you remember this. He was told to go into the ark 7 days before the flood came. Let me go to. Let me do this. I should have pulled this up ahead of time. Let me go to Genesis chapter 7, I believe. Okay, so yeah, let's see is this on your screen? Let me look and see if this is on your screen. Yeah, there you go. All right, so look at verse 4. He tells Noah to get in the ark, verse 1, and the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. And then verse 7, for yet 7 days and I will cause it to rain on the earth. So it's actually 7 days before the rain comes that he has him get in the ark. Since Jesus used this as a picture of the end times, you could say this is a fair. There's something here that could work pretty well with the pre-trib view that God brings his people out 7 years before he brings the final destruction on the world. That works as well. Let me give you another thing, though. When we go back to Matthew, here's this, guys. Matthew 24. Remember why Jeff Durbin said that it must be a taking for judgment. It's because in verse 39, they knew not till the flood came and took them all away. That took them all away has to be the ungodly being destroyed by the flood. That is not what that means. And I can say that with confidence because we've done good Bible study. Here's the reason. The word take there is not paralambano, it's not harpazo, it's aero, which means to lift up, to raise up, to remove, to carry away. Now, if he wanted to compare, take them all away, and one shall be taken, the other left, then he would say, take them all away, and paralambano, and one shall be paralambano, the other left, right? One will be taken, the other left. But these are two different kinds of takings because Noah was lifted up from the earth. He was that's what the word aero means, to lift up, to take up, to raise, to take something up, to pick it up. He was picked up, raised up into the ark, and that's how it describes the ark. The ark was lifted up from the earth, and in Genesis chapter 7 through 9. And so he was lifted up from the earth, aero, and that's different from the paralambano, because the paralambano is I'm receiving you to myself. That's different, but it's similar. So he's showing the similarity without using the same words for taken. Guys, this is not talking, in Matthew 24, we are not talking about, and he knew not until the flood, they knew not until the flood came and took them all away, is talking about Noah being raised up from the earth. Because the flood came and took Noah away and destroyed them. They were eating, drinking, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, meaning took Noah away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. This seems obviously to be lifting up, the word aero, to lift up, to raise, to remove. If it is talking about the world, it doesn't seem like it is because of the word choice. It seems to be talking about Noah being raised up from the earth. But if it is, it doesn't matter because it doesn't, if Jesus was trying to draw a comparison between that and one being in the field, two being in the field, one is taken, he would have used the same word for taken as he did the verse before. He used a different word, which shows he's not comparing the two as if they're the same. He's showing that the scenario is the same. When they say peace and safety, this thing happens, and there is a taking. So then we don't have a very strong argument for the postmillennial view at all. And the fact that Paul quotes Jesus and uses the word harpazo, and Jesus uses the softer receiving word, we have every textual reason that we find in Matthew 24 and in 1 Thessalonians 5 tells us Paul's quoting Jesus, Paul's talking about what Jesus was talking about, and Jesus was talking about whatever Paul was talking about. When Paul is saying rapture or harpazo, when he's saying caught up, he's talking about the thing that Jesus is talking about when he says, paralambano, receive you unto myself. This seems to be the same thing. This is the same thing. So then Matthew 24, I think I've shown now that Matthew 24 is talking about the rapture. All right, so what does that leave us with? Well, it means that we can't be postmillennial. Okay, postmillennialism is pretty much out the door if Matthew 24 is talking about the rapture. That's true. Sorry, I think we've already pushed postmillennialism out the door. We've spent a lot of time on it, so let's move on from postmillennialism and let's talk about the different views of the rapture. Does Matthew 24, since it's talking about the rapture, does it talk about a pre-trib rapture, a mid-trib rapture, a pre-wrath rapture, or a post-trib rapture? You say, how come you're finally getting this and we're an hour into the stream? Because that's how we do. Okay, that's just how we are here at the Bible Explained. I really want to be careful. I want to show you that this is not something we just, because I said so kind of a thing. And then I'm going to actually respond to objections to the pre-trib view at the end, where it's weakest. So we're going to take our time. We probably go for a little bit longer here. So let's look at some different ideas. Let's look at what these both say about it. Remember what our comparison was. Let me pull this back up here. Here we go. Okay, so here on the screen, you're seeing all the comparisons. There's at least 6 comparisons between Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 5. The day and hour is unknown. People will be eating and drinking and giving in marriage. It'll be like a thief in the night. It'll be sudden travail upon a woman with child. You must watch and not sleep and be ready, and people will be taken from the earth. So we've established, I think, pretty well that taken has to be talking about the rapture. That whatever Paul is talking about, Jesus is talking about, those are the same thing. That taken is a positive thing, taking positively people from the earth at receiving, Christ is receiving them in his coming. So then, when does this rapture happen? Well, if you look at Matthew 24, it's hard to say that it could happen any other time other than pre-trib. And the reason is because Matthew 24 is all about the signs that will lead up to the end times. Look at verse 15 all the way through verse 35. We talked about this last time. When ye see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Now, he says, verse 21, for there shall be great tribulation, such as not was since the beginning of the world to that time. That is a quotation from Daniel chapter 12. Do you know what's also in Daniel chapter 12? A day countdown by the days of how much time it is from the abomination of desolation until 1,290 days later when the persecution ends, the great tribulation. And then 45 days after that, the end of the whole 7 weeks ends when Jesus returns. So there's a to the day countdown in Daniel 12, and Jesus is quoting Daniel 12 in verse 21. There's a to the day countdown of when he's coming back once you see the abomination of desolation. So the disciples say, when is this going to happen? When is it? What's the sign of your coming? And he says, the abomination of desolation, guys. Go read Daniel the prophet. He said exactly how many days are coming after the abomination of desolation until the coming of the Son of Man. So go back and read Daniel chapter 12, guys. And then he keeps referring to the days of Daniel 12, verse 22. And those days should be shortened. The days should be shortened. Remember, there's a 1,290-day period that ends the persecution, but another 45 days before Christ returns, the persecution is shortened. He talks about in those days, all the way through. There's signs in the moon, signs in heaven, all this stuff. And then he says, But of that day and hour knoweth no man. Well, hang on a second. If we're going back to a time when there isn't any signs, then we have to go before the abomination of desolation. So when he says, okay, but of the day and hour, since we know, Paul's quoting and calling that times and seasons, that's a period of time, not a 24-hour day and a 60-minute hour. He's saying, of the period of time, no one knows when the period of time starts. What period of time? Well, the period of time has to start before the abomination of desolation, because Jesus has just spent 21 verses from 15 all the way through 35, telling us that here's the exact number of days. Go back and read Daniel, where you have the days counted out from the abomination of desolation until the end. So then when he says no one knows, he's got to be talking about a time period that begins before the abomination. This just seems to make sense. I'm not sure how I could make it. If I held another view, I would have a really hard time with this. Now that we see that Jesus and Paul are referring to the same thing, and Paul called it times and seasons, so now we're not talking about a 24-hour day. We're talking about a period of time. And since that's the case, what period of time is unknown? Well, it would have to start before the abomination of desolation. So now we're making the post-trib rapture look difficult, because he says, of that day and hour knows no man, no, not the angels in heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So now he says the day and hour is called the coming of the Son of Man. Oh, okay. So then day and hour is a time period, and coming of the Son of Man can also be referring to a time period. This makes sense. In 2 Peter chapter 3, we see the day of the Lord referred to as a time period when Christ returns and the elements are melted with fervent heat. You say, well, postmillennials don't believe that's a time period. They believe it's all in one 24-hour day. I know, but I've already dealt with postmillennialism. So let's look at the premillennial position, the in-house debate. In premillennialism, we don't believe that the day that Jesus returns, 24-hour day that Jesus returns, is the same day that the elements melt with a fervent heat and he recreates the world. We believe Jesus returns as 1,000 years on this planet, and then he new heavens and new earth, right? But 2 Peter chapter 3 says that they all happen together in the day of the Lord. Why? Because the day of the Lord is a time period. So also can the coming of the Son of Man be? The coming of the Son of Man can be referring to a time period, and it seems very obvious that it is, because it's compared to the day and hour that no man knows, and Paul calls that the times and seasons. Okay, so this makes sense on the pre-trib view. I'm saying here's how the pre-trib view makes sense of this. You say, well, that doesn't, maybe you don't, it doesn't have to be that. That's true. What I'm saying is the pre-trib view is very versatile here. The knockout punches don't land on the pre-trib view, because the pre-trib view is not saying this is a literal 24-hour day. We're saying this is a day, this is times and seasons, and we have good reason to think that because Paul was quoting Jesus and said times and seasons. And so, since in verse 37, he's quoting verse 36, or he's referring back to verse 36, but, so the day and hour is unknown, it's not going to only be, it's unknown, it's like the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Now we're saying day and hour is equal to the coming of the Son of Man. So coming of the Son of Man can be a time period, day and hour can be a time period. Days, look at that, days, plural of Noah. The day and hour is like the days of Noah. Wait a minute. That gives us more reason to think day and hour is a time period, because it's like the days, plural, of Noah. In fact, if you look at Luke 17, this is repeated, days of Noah, days of Lot, plural days. Verse 38, for in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, Jesus has just given us all the terrible, sun is darkened, moon turned to blood, all this stuff is going to happen, where they're gathering for war. Go back and read Daniel 11 and 12. I mean, there's just this whole war described in Daniel 11 that leads into the great tribulation against believers. And you think they're saying peace and safety? No, that is definitely not happening within the time period right before the 24-hour day of Christ. Daniel makes that abundantly clear that right before Christ returns is great tribulation, is war against the saints, is war not only against the saints, but Daniel 11 talks about this Roman leader warring to the north of Israel, warring to the south of Israel, setting up his tabernacle in the center. I mean, this doesn't fit very well. So what do we have left? Well, we would have to back up to before everything gets bad. This is why the pre-trib rapture works really well here, because Jesus has just talked about how bad everything's going to get within the last 3.5 years. And then he says, but of that day and hour, times and seasons, time period, no one knows when it starts, and it starts when things are peace and safety. That word "but" of the day and hour is very important, right? He says all of this is going to happen, and that's after the sign, the abomination of desolation. But of the day and hour, it happens when there's peace and safety. This is the exact opposite. He's saying the exact opposite things. He says, leading up to the day, lots of bad things. But the whole day and hour, it starts without any warnings. Okay, so then I think the clear context here is that verse 36, Jesus is switching up and he's saying, yes, leading up to the final day that I return, there's a lot of signs and there's a lot of destruction. But before that sign that I gave you, the abomination of desolation, there is no signs and there's no destruction. There's peace and safety. Okay, this is going to leave us really with the mid-trib view or the pre-trib view. Okay, on our list of views. All right, let's continue with this chart here. There are two things that I think are important. Paul also talks about the voice of the archangel in verse 16 of 1 Thessalonians 4. And Jesus talked about the angels gathering people with the sound of a trumpet in verse 31. This is actually a problem for the pre-trib view. I'm being honest about it. I don't think it's a real problem, but it's something that we have to deal with. So we'll talk about it in a moment. He also said, with the trump of God, there's a voice of an archangel and the trump of God. In verse 31, Jesus said that he shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet, and they shall gather his elect. Gather his elect seems to match with what Paul says in verse 17. We're caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Right? We're caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And that matches with what Jesus said, and he shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet. Now let's zoom in on Matthew 24 to see that. Got so many things to jump around here to put it on the screen. Okay. Matthew 24, verse 31. He shall send his angels, archangel, with the sound of a great trumpet, okay, the trump of God, and they shall gather together his elect. We will meet him in the air. We will meet the Lord, and we'll gather together with him, right? So that does sound a lot like what Paul is saying, and we already established that Paul is quoting Jesus. So then is verse 31 talking about the rapture? If so, it's right in the middle of, they'll see the Son of Man, sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send. So this sounds like a post-tribulation view. This is probably the best argument for a post-tribulation view of the rapture, is that since we're talking about Paul quoting Jesus, and Paul also mentioned archangel, trumpet, and gathering to Christ, and verse 31 talks about angels, a trumpet, and gathering to Christ, then maybe we're talking about a post-tribulation rapture. Well, I've already given you the problem with a post-tribulation rapture is that Jesus is talking about a rapture, and he says that it happens when you're not expecting it, even though he's just given you the to-the-day countdown in Daniel 12, when you know he's coming. So that doesn't seem to fit very well with the context of the very passage that Jesus is speaking of. Because here he says, you will see the Son of Man coming in clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet. So you're going to see him coming in the clouds, and you're not going to know. Two going to be in the field, one's going to be taking the other left. What? It doesn't sound like a post-tribulation view in verse 30 and verse 40 and 41, but it does seem like a post-tribulation gathering in verse 31. But Paul seems to be referring to something similar. So this is not, this is not a problem for the Pre-Trib view. The reason is because the Pre-Trib view, as I said, is very versatile. It dodges the blows. The Pre-Trib view presupposes that there is a second gathering to Christ when he returns, okay? The Pre-Trib view doesn't think that nobody becomes a believer after the rapture. The Pre-Trib view, by the way, those who say, oh, if you've heard the gospel before the rapture, you can't receive Christ after, I don't see any reason for that view. The Pre-Trib view says, all right, Christ takes people out of this world, and then there's a 7-year period, and when he returns, there's more elect for him to gather together. And if he's going to do that twice, if he's going to gather his elect at the end, and he's also going to start the time period by gathering elect, by gathering believers, and also gathering elect at the end of the time period, why would we expect them to look differently? Why wouldn't we expect him to do them with similar symbolism, right? Shouldn't we expect that he would use a trumpet both times? Trumpets were, in Numbers, used for gathering people. Don't you think he would use angels both times? One is angels, the other is an archangel, a voice of an archangel. So the fact that he uses a trumpet and he uses an angel in both times, one of them angels, one of them singular angel, is pretty, that works pretty well. That works just fine with a Pre-Trib view. So it isn't proof against the Pre-Trib view. And since the Post-Trib view has a lot of problems, I think Pre-Trib still comes out on top here. So Paul then, we would expect when he's quoting Jesus, is saying, don't forget, as the Pre-Trib view would say, don't forget that he's also going to gather us with an archangel and a trumpet, just like he's going to gather at the end people with angels and a trumpet. So he's, again, referring to Jesus' words, but using them as comforting to the people who are going to go in the rapture. That would be the Pre-Trib rapture view. Now, let's look at, I got to make sure I cover everything. Yeah. Okay. Luke 26. Luke 17, verse 26. I've got to go back to Luke 17 because I think this is pretty important. I mentioned this, the days of Noah. Look at Luke 17:26, where this same account is referred to. And here it says, as it was in the days, plural, of Noah, so shall it be also in the days, plural, of the Son of Man. Oh, so the coming of the Son of Man can also be referred to as the days of the Son of Man. Oh, this reinforces the view that I've already posited, and that is that coming of the Son of Man is a time period. It's not a 24-hour day or a 60-minute hour. It's a time period. So I think we have an abundant amount of evidence from parallel passages and quotations in Paul that show us that when he says of that day and hour, he's talking about a time period. Luke says it's the days of the Son of Man. He talks about the coming of the Son of Man, and the coming of the Son of Man includes people being taken when they're not expecting it. Now let's zoom in again on Matthew 24, and we'll go to verse 40 and 41 specifically. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. Luke adds another one to this. He adds two being in a bed. So two will be in the field, the one will be taken, the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken and the other left. All right, now imagine what Jesus has just described. Sun is darkened, moon is blood, the powers of heaven are shaken, and there's great tribulation, but a believer and an unbeliever are both in a field together working. Do you think that's happening at the end of the on the 24-hour day that Jesus returns? Do you think that's not what Jesus just described? It's not the context, and it doesn't fit at all with any of the timelines that we can suppose from Revelation or from Daniel. I mean, there's no scenario where a believer and an unbeliever at the moment that Jesus returns are like, hey, let's go out, go to work together. I mean, one of them has a mark of the beast on him, the other one doesn't, you know? I mean, what's going on here? Why are there two people in the field and one of them's a believer and one of them's not? Why are there even people in the field at all? I mean, this is just the sun is gone. The sun is darker, the moon's turned to blood, and you guys are out in the field. Two women are just an unbeliever and a believer hanging out, grinding at the mill together. Really? An unbeliever and a believer are just sleeping in bed together, and one of them's gone. I mean, what? Christ has said that the entire world's going to hate you. There's going to be great persecution and great tribulation against believers during this time. And we're going to say, they're hanging out together. You know, they're sleeping in the same bed together. They're working together. No, of course this isn't happening. This is not what Christ just described about the moment before his return. So this has to be talking about the moment before the time period in which he returns. That fits. So time period starts with peace and safety, two people being in the field, one's a Christian, one's not, one's a believer, one's not. That's fine. That works just fine. The last day doesn't work at all. Doesn't work at all. Okay, so this is why I think the pre-trib rapture is a very solid position. Now, some people are going to say that works just as well for the mid-trib rapture, but it doesn't really work at all with the post-trib, does it? It really doesn't. But it works just as well with the mid-trib rapture. Okay, let's let these different views sort of interact with each other now. Okay. Let me first start with conclusions. It's at a time of peace and safety, and when people don't know the hour, when two are in a field and they're happy with each other, believers and unbelievers, and they are. Paul comforts people in their current distress, not saying you're going to have future distress and then you'll be comforted. You'll be comforted in your current distress because you'll be taken to be with the Lord. So those all seem to say pre-trib rapture is what Paul's talking about. Pre-trib rapture is what Jesus is talking about when you compare those together. Let's look at difficulties for the pre-trib argument. I already mentioned that the Matthew 24:31, which says there is... there's the sound of the trumpet and they're gathering the elect. That's the end. Is that the same thing that Paul's talking about? No, I don't think so. I think the context shows that they're similar things, and they are Paul is playing on those similarities, but they're obviously two different things, I think. So it's a difficulty for the pre-trib view, but it's not really a problem, not a major problem. We can also add to this, if you want to call it a problem, a difficulty. Mark chapter 13. Mark 13, verse 27, which states it this way. Then shall they see the Son... Let me make sure you guys can see that on the screen. Okay, yeah. Then shall they see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and then shall he send his angels and shall gather his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. This is actually really interesting because this is the same statement that Matthew gives us in verse 24, verse 31. But Mark here is saying, then shall he send his angels, meaning what? After they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory, then he sends his angels. So this is an after Christ returns gathering. Here's the problem. Paul is talking about we meet him in the air. Mark indicates that this gathering that's talked about in Matthew 24:31 and here in Mark 13:27 is gathering after Christ returns. That can't be the thing Paul's talking about. And since Paul refers to the other reasons that we talked about, the peace and safety, all that kind of stuff at the time and season when it happens, I think then 26 and 27 of Mark show us those are two different gatherings. All right, another problem or trouble, maybe a difficulty for the pre-trib argument would be found in Luke chapter 17. Again, Luke 17 is the parallel passage, even though it's Luke 21, where we get the Olivette Discourse. Luke includes this teaching earlier. in the ministry of Christ, because apparently Christ taught it more than once. And here's Luke 17, verse 37. Here it says, 2 women shall be grinding together, the one shall be taken, the other left. 2 men shall be in the field, one shall be taken, and the other left. And this is where we also have in verse 34, I tell you, in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed, the one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. And then verse 37, and they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. Wait, doesn't that sound like where the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together? That sounds like the destruction that Jesus brings at his return. Remember, Revelation 19, after Christ returns, there's this feast of birds that come and eat all the bodies that he destroyed when he returns. Okay, so 2 people are in the field, one's taken and the other is left, and the disciples say, Where is he taken, Lord? And the Lord says, He's taken to the judgment where all the bodies will be destroyed. Okay, that sounds like this sounds like postmillennial. It sounds like they're taken to destruction, right? Which doesn't work in 70 AD, but that's besides the point. They're taken to destruction, and the believers are left behind, not destroyed. Well, remember, the only taking that's described in the passages in Olivette Discourse is gathering his elect from the 4 corners of the earth, not gathering people for destruction. So that this would be the only account of people being gathered for destruction, if that were the case. But also we have to assume that here, where, Lord, is saying something specific. So we have to assume that where means where will they be taken? It could also mean where will they be left? It could also mean where will you return? Right? Because he says the coming of the Son of Man. Right? When you desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, you shall not see it. This is all talking about the coming of the Son. So where will you return, Lord? Right? So what is the where talking about? And Jesus' response is, wherever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. There's going to be a lot of dead bodies. The answer to where is there's going to be a lot of dead bodies. Okay, well then, to get a little bit more context, we'd have to just read Matthew 24, the parallel passage. And Matthew 24, verse 17. I think it's 17. Maybe it's 27. 27. Yeah. Okay. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Oh, so that's where he's coming. So Matthew makes it clear what he's talking about when they say where. It means that's where he's going to be. So when he comes, you'll know where he is because it'll be easy to spot him. You just find all the dead bodies and he's over there. He's going to be killing a lot of people when he comes. That's all that's saying. That's where he's going to be. So again, it's a little bit of a difficulty for the pre-trib view. I don't think it's a major problem, but I do think there's real problems for post-trib, mid-trib, and pre-wrath views. And so let me give you those. The first one is the post-trib view, and the post-trib view has a lot of problems. We've already mentioned several of them. The problem with Matthew 24 itself, where Matthew 24 even seems to refer to a gathering of the elect after Christ returns, not as he's returning in the clouds. You see him in the clouds, and then he sends out his angels to gather the elect. Well, I thought we were supposed to be joining him in the clouds. How long is he up there in the clouds? You see him in the clouds, then he sends his angels to gather them up. We all go up to him in the clouds, and then he returns. Man, he's hanging out there in the clouds for a while, you know? Seems to be the text, the natural flow of the text, not saying it's impossible, but the natural flow of the text seems to indicate that there's Christ returning and then gathering the elect. And this fits very well with Revelation 19 and 20. We'll go there very quickly. In Revelation 19, we have Christ's return and the feast of the birds, which he certainly referenced. in the Olivette Discourse. But then it says he locks up Satan in the bottomless pit. And I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given unto them. I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Christ and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. So here we have a resurrection, which very obviously appears to be chronologically after the return of Christ. He's seeing thrones, and here there is a resurrection from the dead. And there is a clear break here between, in the narrative, the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth. All the fowls were filled with their flesh. And the angel came down and took the dragon and put him in the bottomless pit. And there's thrones and there's a resurrection. This fits very well with the context of Matthew 24, which seems to imply that after Christ returns, he sends out angels to gather his elect together and resurrect those who have died during the tribulation. And this also appears to be the case in Revelation 20. The natural implication of these texts gives us Christ returns, then he gathers elect and raises his elect from the dead, where Paul says that he receives them in the air to himself, which implies these are two different events. These are two different things happening. So the postmillennialism, the post-trib argument has to deal with this two different things happening problem, because it does appear like there's two different things happening, and they can only account for one of them. Because if Christ is rapturing everybody right as he's returning at the end in the post-trib, then he gets to the earth. Who is he raising at that point? And you also have the problem, who goes into the millennium, and how do they have kids, and why do kids rebel later? Why do their children rebel later if they were all raptured and all got new bodies? You have a whole host of problems. And probably the biggest problem with the post-trib view, besides the ones we've already mentioned, is the problem of imminence. There's no imminence. Christ can't return today. He definitely can't return today. And until you see the abomination of desolation, you don't really need to start watching for Christ. It couldn't happen today, and he couldn't take us home to be with him today. It can't happen. Now, this is interesting, because if you look at the first and second century writings of the early church fathers, they are unanimous in one thing about the end times. They all agree that Christ could come anytime, and they're looking for him to come. This is a problem for the post-millennial view, because post-millennials say, no, he can't come until after the Roman Empire is conquered with the gospel. Here's Ignatius of Antioch living in the middle of the Roman Empire on his way to die, and he thinks Christ could come anytime. Papias thinks Christ could come anytime. In fact, several hundred years later, Eusebius doesn't really like Papias, because Papias is more premillennial in his views. The point is that the unanimous consensus of the early church fathers is that Christ could come anytime, and you kind of take that away when you have the post-trib view. So the post-trib has the problem of imminence, has the problem of what seems to be two different kinds of gatherings to Christ, and post-trib tries to put those two things together at basically the same time, one right before Christ returns and one after, and it doesn't really work. And so they try to make it all fit together, and it doesn't really fit as if it was one event. It falls out much more naturally as two different events. And so the post-trib view has those challenges. If you're a post-trib, maybe you have really robust answers to those challenges, and so I encourage you to send them to me. The pre-wrath view has the imminence problem, just like the post-trib, right? If you believe, let me pull up this just so you can see it again, just to give you the visual here. Okay. So we talked about the problems with the post-trib view. Let's talk about the pre-wrath view. The problem with the pre-wrath view is that there is, you still have the imminence problem. Everyone, again, all the early church fathers believed in imminence. If you're after the abomination of desolation, you don't really have imminence. Jesus talked about the exact amount of time. So you really don't, the idea that Jesus could come at any time right now certainly isn't the truth. because we haven't seen the abomination of desolation. So you have the imminence problem. You also have, why are more people saved after the rapture? Right? Like, why is Christ, when he returns, gathering his elect if he took his elect out before the wrath, the pre-wrath? If the wrath all falls in the last couple months. Are we saying in those last couple months people repent? I mean, that seems a little strange. Maybe it's possible, but I think that there at least is a difficulty with the view. If they're gathered from the four winds of heaven, that means they're all over the planet when Christ returns. But we're saying that there was a rapture right before he returns, a few months before. So you still have the two events problem with the pre-wrath. They're just too close to make a lot of sense. And also, why? Why do we believe it's pre-wrath? I think people just say, well, 1 Thessalonians says we're not appointed to wrath. The wrath of God is in the bowl judgments. Well, the wrath of God is talked about in the book of Revelation before the bowl judgments. I don't think we have a good reason to believe in a pre-wrath rapture, because you're still in between the abomination of desolation and the return of Christ. So you got the imminency problem, you've got all the problems and none of the reasons. So yeah, let's go to mid-trib. Okay, I think these are the order of most likely here among the rapture views is probably the least likely being pre-wrath, the second least likely being post-trib, the second most likely being mid-trib, and I think the clear winner, it being the pre-trib. So let's talk about mid-trib, as I think it's the second most likely. It's got some problems, some big problems, but I don't think they're as big as the others. The benefit of the mid-trib is that it's saying that the rapture takes place before the abomination of desolation, which seems to be the clear implication of Christ's teaching in Matthew 24. He says that the sign that gives you the countdown when you know Christ is returning is the abomination of desolation. But before you know when Christ is returning, there's going to be people taken. So then mid-trib and pre-trib are our two good options before the abomination of desolation, right? So there's your positive for mid-trib. The problem with mid-trib is you have to be a pretty heavy dispensationalist to be mid-trib. Have to be pretty heavy dispensationalist. Here's the reason. Because if there's a rapture right before the abomination of desolation, then who is Jesus saying is running to the mountains at the abomination of desolation? As the Jews, right? It's not the believers. The Gentiles are all taken out, and he leaves the Jewish believers behind. That's really who are the believers that the devil is warring against, in this great persecution. It's the ones that he didn't take in the rapture. You either have he raptures all the believers, and then you have no time for new people to become believers before the war starts on them, because this is right before the abomination, if you have a mid-trib rapture view. Or you have, he only takes Gentile believers and he leaves all the Jewish believers behind. And that's a extreme in dispensationalism that I don't understand. I don't think it fits with Revelation 4, where we have 24 elders, which seems to imply the 12 tribes of Israel who are believers, and the 12 apostles, the church, who are believers. That implies all of God's people kind of believers in heaven before the tribulation starts. There's just no reason to think that God is leaving behind believers because they're not enough part of the church. They're Jews. They have to go through the wrath. Wait a minute. If they're believers, they're believers. And so I think we can go way too far into this dispensational thing and say, just because God has a plan to bring Israel to a certain place to fulfill certain promises, that means people who are saved now are not truly part of the church. They're still Israel. Wait a minute. They could be both. And if Christ is going to rapture his church, he's going to rapture the people who are part of his church who are descended from Israel. I mean, so I don't think you have a good reason for this division. So I think that's a big problem with the mid-trib view. You do have a little bit of problem with imminency, but not much, because it's before the abomination of desolation, so you don't have a big problem with imminency. But I think you have to say, why are we saying that year 1, 2, and 3, and the first half of the fourth year of the what we call the tribulation, is peace and safety? If you read Daniel 11, it's not when people are saying peace and safety. Daniel 11 talks about all the wars of this Antichrist figure leading up to when he plants his tent in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem and begins the war against the saints, the abomination of desolation. Which means leading up to the abomination of desolation, we do not have people saying peace and safety. We have people saying war. And this seems to be consistent with what we read in Revelation as well. So go back and read Daniel 11 or go watch my live stream on Daniel 11 and 12, and you can see that the peace and safety aspect doesn't really work with a mid-trib rapture view either, because year 1, 2, 3, and half of 4 are wars, not peace and safety. So if you want to have a really robust, best, strongest view out of all of these, the one that dodges all the blows, the one that really fits well and is very satisfying, is the pre-trib rapture. The reason people don't want to be pre-trib is because there's been a lot of bad arguments for pre-trib. Arguments that also say, for instance, let me give you just very quickly, and then we'll go to the questions. People will say, "Oh, look, the pre-trib rapture is has to be true because Matthew 24 is all about the Jews." Well, hang on. If Matthew 24 is all about the Jews, yeah, it's all about the Jews, so the church has to be taken out. Well, then you're saying that Matthew 24 verses 36 and on through 42 is not talking about the rapture. But I've just established that Paul seems to think that it is. So that doesn't really work. To say that, oh, Matthew 24 is all about the Jews, I think there's a Jewish context there because I think God is accomplishing something through the Jewish people. But look at Revelation. The premillennials need to read the book of Revelation and see there's people from all kinds of tongues that seem to be getting saved and coming to Christ and becoming believers, maybe even through the witness of the Jews in Revelation chapter 7. So look, yes, God is doing a thing through the Jews, but we can't be these hyper-dispensationalist, it's time for the Jews to go through trouble because even if they're believers in God, they get left behind. This just doesn't seem. It's true that God is the time of Jacob's trouble does seem to be talking about those 7 years, and it is a time for God to sort of get a hold of the unbelieving Jewish nation and shake them and say, you need to listen up, you need to become believers. But it doesn't mean He leaves behind Jewish people who are not believe, or who are already believers, who are part of the church. So one more problem. Let me give you one more problem. We'll go to your questions. Okay, so plug in your questions. This is your last call for questions, and I'll go to the questions that have been sent to me in just a moment. 1 Corinthians 15. People say this is a problem for the pre-trib view because it talks about the last trumpet. Christ returns at the last trumpet, right? So therefore, 1 Corinthians 15 proves that if the resurrection happens at the last trumpet, then we have to be try to find it here in 1 Corinthians 15, the verse. Verse 52. Let's put it up on your screen. Okay, now I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So that means it has to be the last trumpet, the end of time. Well, that's true. I mean, at the end of the tribulation, you have a trumpet that gathers people for and resurrects believers. That doesn't mean that there's not a trumpet earlier that also gathers people and resurrects people. It doesn't mean that there's only one trumpet. It is eschaton. The eschaton trumpet refers to a gathering call when people are raised. It doesn't mean that there's not two of these gathering calls, and it's finally fulfilled at the last of the two gathering calls, because there will be a second trumpet. If pre-trib is correct, or mid-trib, or pre-wrath, if any view other than post-trib is correct, then, and I think it has to be, then you do have a time of gathering people before Christ returns and a time of gathering people after he returns. And both of them are going to include a trumpet, and both of them are going to include resurrection. And there we go. I mean, so for Paul to talk about all of it as if it were all happening at the last trumpet. Yeah, by the last trumpet, it will all be done. That doesn't mean there wasn't one before that. And to kind of reinforce this, let me just see. Let's just go there. Isaiah 27, I think, is an interesting place to go. Isaiah 27 and verse 13. There we go. It shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in his holy mountain at Jerusalem. So here is another trumpet being blown after Christ returns. So last trumpet is the very last trumpet to ever blow. No, there are other trumpets being blown in the millennium. So last trumpet just means the eschaton trumpet. At that last day trumpet, at the trumpet of the last times, it actually could be referring to the physical trumpet. That trumpet will sound, and when it sounds, people will be raised. And maybe it sounds more than once. But it's the trumpet. It's the eschaton trumpet. So, at any rate, there's a lot of more discussions we can have about that. A lot more evidence that could be produced. But I think this is probably the best arguments against and for the different views on the rapture. And so let's go to your questions now. And if you stuck with me this whole time, oh my goodness, congratulations, guys. You did a whole 2 hours on the rapture. And the first half hour wasn't even about the rapture. So that was very impressive. I am thoroughly impressed. Okay, let's go to Dave. Let's see. Dave says this: I always looked up to my brother as a wise man as to his biblical thoughts. Recently, I found out he's postmillennial. In defending himself, he said, I don't owe the Pentecostal church that we grew up in anything. My question is, what do you think makes people shift towards postmillennial thought? That is a brilliant question, Dave. Thanks for asking that. So my answer is, I think it is a desire for the truth. I think it is a desire for good arguments. In general, premillennialism has historically had, or at least for the last 100 years or so, 50, 60 years, whatever. You had Hal Lindsey, Late Great Planet Earth, Tim LaHaye, Left Behind, and basically you have really, really shallow, poor argumentation for premillennialism that was born out of the mid-1900s. And so as a result, people, when they start to really study their Bibles, they say, I need something that actually deals with the text. And in general, postmillennials there's good arguments for premillennial and bad arguments for premillennial. But postmillennials basically have decent argumentation all across the board. You're going to be pretty consistent across the board. And so somebody who's looking for good arguments are probably going to go to premillennials and say, wow, there's like 75, 80% of the guys I'm hearing in premillennialism can't give me a straight answer and are not giving me good answer, or are not giving me sound argumentation. So over here in the postmillennial camp, I'm hearing good arguments. So I'm going to go that way. I think that's, for a lot of people, I think that's the reason. Is that the reason for your brother? I don't know. I don't know. But I think that is the reason for a lot of people, because it is attractive that postmillennialism actually tries to deal with the text and deal with it honestly. Now, I think they're incorrect, and I think I've showed that over the last several videos. But I'm doing this not because I want to convince everyone to be premillennial and everyone to be pre-trib rapture. I'm doing that. I've done these videos to show you that even as premillennials, we need to have better arguments. We need to give a fair a fair handling of these texts, and not just take these things for granted. Oh, you got to believe with us, believe that what we're saying, or you're wrong. So I think that there's a very good reason, Dave, that people like your brother go to postmillennialism, and it's because it does give solid argumentation. Though I think the argumentation fails, it's at least sound logic, the way they approach it, where a lot of premillennial argumentation is not sound and it's not consistent. So, yeah. Marcus Campbellis says, question on John 6:39 through 40. What does raise him up at the last day? Jesus uses the term at the last day in John several times, referring to the resurrection. How does that fit with the rapture and the coming of the Lord? Okay, I think I kind of answered that, Marcus, but I'm going to just go ahead and refer you back to the answer that I think I gave. And that is, I think the last day, the end day, is, I think we're going to be too narrow if we're saying that has to be the last 24 hours of the planet. Because we know Revelation 20 says there's dead are raised, and then the rest of the dead are not raised. Okay. All right. So you have a first resurrection and a second resurrection, and they're separated by 1,000 years. There's more days after the first resurrection, is what I'm saying. So when Jesus says the last day, he's not saying the last day on the planet Earth. He's saying in the end times time, in the end times day, in that day, the day of the Lord, as again, 2 Peter refers to the day of the Lord, and no premillennial can look at that and say that it's, postmillennials do, but again, I think their argument is flawed. Certainly from the premillennial view, you can't say that the day of the Lord refers to a 24-hour period. And there's no reason to think that. In eschatology, we're not going to look at days and say those always have to be exactly one day. We look at the context and decide what that's talking about. So when it says at the last day, I think it's pretty obvious that he's talking about, in the last time, in the end times, in the day of the Lord, in the eschaton day, right? Eschatology day. Jenny B says, what is the difference in the word church in Revelation and the word saint? Okay, that's interesting. Let me do a quick search here and make sure I'm correct about this. The word church, I can't remember how many times. It's used a lot in Revelation 1, 2, and 3. And it's not used again until Revelation 22. Let me look at the word saint in Revelation. Okay, saints is used Revelation 5, Revelation 8, twice in Revelation 8, once in Revelation 11, 13, all the way through to chapter 20. And so some would say that saints here is referring to believers, but it's specifically not using the word church. And I think that's probably correct, because the word church is focusing in on that body of believers. That is the program of God for the world at this moment. You know, it's His body on the earth. Through the church, He is proclaiming the gospel, and that's clear in Revelation 1. He talks to 7 churches. In Revelation 2, he's talking to 7 churches. In Revelation 3, he talks to 7 churches, and then he starts using to talk about believers, saints, which I think just means believers. But he doesn't use the word church until after the millennium and the new heavens and new earth, and it's really just the conclusion where he says the church and the bride say come, or excuse me, you have the reference in the bride, right? That seems to be talking about the church, and probably also all believers. I would say it's not just the church and the bride, but I think you have the church in chapter 20. Let's see if that is 22. No, actually, it's not mentioned in chapter 22 at all. The word church isn't used there. But you do have implications. You have the 12 apostles in the bride of Christ, the foundation of the city, and you have the bride, the spirit of the bride say come, and all that kind of stuff. So you do have an implication of the church in chapters 21 and 22. So Yeah, I think that's because the program of God is through the nation of Israel to fulfill the prophecy that he was going to use them to be that nation of priests. Remember Exodus 19, before God gives them the 10 commandments, he says, I will make you a nation of priests if you will obey. They continually refuse to obey, and yet in the prophets, Jeremiah 30, 31, God continues to promise that he will still make them a kingdom of priests. He's still going to accomplish this thing. And so the church is accomplishing the work of God at the moment, and God is going to resume for 7 years the nation of Israel, I believe, working through them. And so that works well with the absence of the word church in Revelation 4 through 19. It's not a demand, right? Like people say, oh, that's proof. I think it works well with the pre-trib rapture view. Let's just be honest. It works pretty well with it. It doesn't demand the pre-trib rapture, but it certainly doesn't cause a problem for the pre-trib rapture. All right, next question. Great questions. I love this. Jenny B also says he gathers us from the four winds of heaven. Could we possibly already be in heaven with him? Okay, when it says he gathers his elect from the four winds of heaven, that's obviously the elect that aren't already with him, right? So when he's gathering the elect from the four winds of heaven, those are the ones who aren't with him already, right? Those are the ones who are at different places around the world. So I think that's talking about when Jesus returns, he sets foot on the Mount of Olives, he defeats the armies of the Antichrist, and then he sends his angels out to gather believers from all around the planet because they're in hiding, right? Because of the Great Tribulation. And he gathers them all together to him and establishes the millennial kingdom. So if I'm right about the pre-trib rapture, then we wouldn't need to be gathered. We would already be with him because we would have been gathered earlier. In a sense, you could say that the gathering begins at the beginning of the tribulation and ends at the end of it. You know, you could say it that way. You could think of it that way. Darius says, I'm interested. What would be your interpretation of Matthew 24, verse 43, if we follow the analogy made by Lord Jesus, who could represent the good man of the house? Oh, good question. Oh, I love it. These are great questions, guys. You guys are hitting the nail on the heads here. Nails on heads. Matthew 43. I wanted to get into Matthew 43. Matthew 24, verse 43. I wanted to get a lot further into Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 and finish out the Olivette Discourse discussion that Jesus talks about, but we never got to it. So this gives me a good excuse to go a little further. Here we go. Verse 43. Let me pull it up on your screen. Okay. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not suffered his house to be broken up. Okay, good man of the house should be watching because he doesn't know when the thief comes. So if he knew when he was coming, obviously he'd be watching. But the good man should be watching because he knows a thief will come when he's not ready. So he's watching especially when he's not ready. That seems to be the teaching here. The good man then who needs to be watching is a representation of us. We should be watching for Christ to come because Christ will come like a thief in that, not because he's going to come and do evil, but he is going to come and bring calamity on people. And we should be watching because he's going to come like a thief in that we don't know when he's coming. He's coming at a time when we will not expect it. So when we least expect should be the time we expect. It's the time when I most medium expect that I should be. But anyway, you understand what I'm saying. And this is the theme throughout the rest of the Olivette Discourse, which I wish I could have taken time to talk about. Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour where the Son of Man cometh. The Son of Man coming is like a thief, so the good man watching is us. If that answers your question. That also gives us this imminency principle that we won't know when the day that Jesus comes, we still won't know that he's coming, which has to be talking about something different than the day he comes after the abomination, which we will know exactly when that will be. So there's that. Okay, from the moderator. Doesn't John 6 specifically specify that all believers are raised on the last day? How does that... Okay, so I think we got this question already, but let me go back to it. How does that affect your take on the last trumpet and the two different raisings? Okay, well, let me go to that. Let's go to John 6. I will raise them at the last day. Obviously, again, John 6 is talking about the... is not trying to give us an order of events. Remember that. There are passages that are trying to give us order of events. Daniel's clearly trying to tell us an order of events. You know, this is happening, this many years, this many days, all kinds of things. Matthew 24, Jesus is specifically asked about an order of events. John 6, it's not talking about an order of events for eschatology. He's saying, I will raise them up. Let's look at this. I believe we're looking at verses somewhere around verse 40-ish. Let's see. Okay, verse 39. And this is the Father's will, which he hath sent me, that of all of them which he gave me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. Now, again, he's saying, everyone that the Father gives me, I will raise up again at the last day. So I think the implication of what Jesus is saying here is, the emphasis is very obvious. The emphasis is, I'm going to raise up all of them, right? The at the last day is not intending to tell us in one 24-hour period. It's certainly not talking about the last day ever. There will be more days after the resurrection. We know we go on for eternity with Christ. So last isn't talking about the very last day ever. And day is not talking about the very last 24 hours ever. Okay, so I think then that the fact that the context is pretty clear that he's simply saying, in the end times, I will raise them up. When it's time for me to raise them up, I'll raise them up. Not now, but later. Jesus as the Messiah is here now, but he's not raising everybody now. Oh, that's the last day. That's when I come later, right? So I think that's the obvious implication. Again, I don't think it's fair to take passages that are talking about things that will happen and say that they're telling us when they will happen, when they're just saying they will happen, like 1 Corinthians 15 at the last trumpet. It's not trying to tell us the timing of things. It's not saying the last trumpet, which is after this trumpet and before that trumpet in Isaiah 27, but that's the last trumpet of this. It's not saying that. It's saying at the eschaton day, at the eschaton trumpet, at the day when the last things take place, at the trumpet when the last things are announced by a trumpet, at the trumpet that gathers people at the end. These are not talking about the very last trumpet that will ever be blown. We saw that in Isaiah 27. It's not talking about the very last day that will ever happen. It's not talking about one 24-hour day, I don't think. He could just as easily have said, in the last days, and would have been expressing the exact same concept. The point here is not made on a 24-hour day. Again, a good question, but I don't think that it's... I don't think we need to draw our order of events of eschatology from passages that aren't intending to tell us an order of events. The context there is not trying to give us that. Continuing on, let's see, where were we? Okay, Marcus, we did Marcus Campbellis, Jenny B, Darius, Patrick. Couldn't Paul be quoting Jesus concerning the rapture from John 14:3? Okay, let's see. I got a note from the moderator saying you didn't need to do that question. You already addressed it. But you know what? It was good for me to actually go there because I felt like I hadn't addressed it well. Let's do John 14. Thank you, moderator, by the way, for all your hard work. Is that up on your screen? Let's see. Yes, it is. Okay. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not true, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know and the way you know. Now, it is true that receive you unto myself sounds a lot like our English translation of 1 Thessalonians 4, doesn't it? But we don't have any of the other quotations from 1 Thessalonians, so I don't think that's as strong. And actually, the phrase "receive you unto myself." Let me real quick. I'm going to do a quick. See if I can do this very quickly, so I don't take up forever. John 14. I'm going to look at the Greek word here for "receive you." I wonder if it's paralambano. That would be really cool if it was "receive you." Haha, it is paralambano. That is very interesting. This reinforces my point. Thank you for pointing this out. The best questions are, I think it was Rush Limbaugh who used to say, the best questions are the questions that make the host look good. Well, this question makes my argument look very good. I appreciate the question. Okay, so no, I don't think that's what 1 Thessalonians is talking about, because Paul used the word, again, he used the word harpazo, which is taking by force, right? But it's obviously meant in a good way. Jesus, in the Olivette Discourse, had used the word paralambano, and he uses the word paralambano again in John 14 when he says, I will go to prepare a place for you, and I will come again and receive you unto myself, paralambano, which gives us further information on what he's talking about in Matthew 24, receiving you unto myself. Just because it's translated into English as take, one will be taken and the other left, and it sounds like that's a harsh taking for judgment, doesn't mean that's what it actually is. The word paralambano means receive you unto myself. That's exactly the word used here. It's a shame that I hadn't included this in my presentation. Actually, as I was talking to you earlier, I'm like, oh man, I wish I had looked up receive you unto myself, and you guys gave me an excuse to do it. Yes, paralambano is the same word there, and so that does give us incredible confirmation of Matthew 24 being about the same thing. Christ coming to receive people to himself, not coming to take people for judgment. I don't think taking people for judgment does not work in Matthew 24, verse 41 and 40 and 41. I don't think it works. The word, he just wouldn't have used that word for it. The Greek word does not at all imply that. There's no way to make it work. Okay, back to more questions. By the way, Patrick gets the gold star for the best question of the day. I'm sorry for everyone else who asked questions. Okay. All right. I'm just laughing at all the comments that the moderator has sent me. Not your comments that he's saying in between. All right. Anyway, so guys, this is awesome. This has been really a ton of fun. I really wanted to present the robust case for the pre-trib rapture. I've done debates on this a long time ago. I've refined my view since then. I've looked and said, no, this doesn't work. This works. This doesn't work. And I think I can say with a high level of confidence after this study that pre-millennialism is, I think, unavoidable. I'm just very confident of this. You look at Daniel, you look at Matthew 24. I don't know how I could ever be content to be a postmillennial after doing this study, because I would feel dishonest. It seems very obvious to me that I have a high level of confidence that premillennialism is absolutely correct. I also have a rather high level of confidence that Matthew 24 verses 40 and 41 are in fact talking about the rapture, what Paul talked about. I don't see how you could escape that. It seems so clear that Paul is talking about what Jesus was saying. Paul makes it, he even says, I said to you by the word of the Lord. He quotes Jesus at least 5 times. 6 times would be the caught-away, the rapture, right? Harpazo versus paralambano. And then the fact that Jesus is using the word paralambano, which means receiving to myself, and even we've added to this the John 14, seems obvious that premillennialism, I think, is very obviously true. I think that Matthew 24 is very obviously talking about the rapture, the thing that Paul is talking about in 1 Thessalonians 4. And I think that if you compare the time of peace and safety and the imminence that's clearly there, and you look at the fact that that day and hour is times and seasons, not 24-hour day, I think you come to the conclusion that with somewhat less certainty than premillennialism, and the fact that Matthew 24 is talking about the rapture, I think you can still come to a conclusion that the best of all the views, the most robust of the rapture views, is the pre-trib rapture view. And this is, I'm just saying this from what I'm, as much as I can, an objective perspective. I began my study probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe even 6 years ago, on the end times and eschatology, thinking I'm a pre-trib rapture guy, and I'm probably not going to be by the time I'm done. Let me just be honest, and I'll just admit it. I'm going to study this, and I'm probably going to change my mind. And after I studied it, I said, well, I changed my mind about why I'm for the pre-trib rapture, but I actually think the most solid, the most robust view here is the pre-trib rapture. So that's me, guys. I mean, I know everyone's going to think I'm not very intellectual. Scholarly opinion is against pre-trib rapture, and I think it's because. So let me give you this as we close. Scholarly thought has shifted away from the pre-trib, any kind of pre-trib ideas, and that means university teachers, that kind of thing, theologians, that kind of stuff. The reason why that's mostly shifted away from the pre-trib position is because pre-trib became very popular in the mid-1900s. Hal Lindsey, Tim LaHaye, and those arguments were soundly rebutted and debunked. So this is a position that has, in the scholarly world, you've already been debunked. Why are you bringing it up? What scholar wants to take a position that's an already debunked position and say, well, I've got new arguments for it? You know, it makes you look anti-intellectual. And so I understand that. And since I'm not a scholar and I don't try to pretend to have some kind of intellectual prowess, I can take whatever view I want, and I'm not going to lose any position over it. I'm not going to be made fun of or anything. Some people make fun of me, but that's okay. They already do. So I can look at this, I think, I feel like I'm a little bit freer to look at this objectively than some scholars would be, because it's an already debunked position. But I agree with the scholars that the previous debunking of many of these arguments, like, the falling away in 2 Thessalonians is the rapture and things like that, I think they're absolutely right about that. So I acknowledge all of those, and yet I stick with my conclusion, and that is that the most robust, the view that stands up to all the scrutiny, that has the least difficulties and seems to handle its difficulties best, is the pre-trib view. Does that mean it couldn't possibly be something else? No, it doesn't mean that. What I'm saying is that the text itself seems to heavily lean in a direction that can only be satisfied with the pre-tribulation rapture view. It heavily leans in imminency. It heavily leans towards peace and safety. It heavily leans towards two people in the field not warring with one another. It heavily leans towards everything you expect to see in a pre-trib view. And there's only two passages in the Bible that talk about the rapture. There's only two. There's 1 Thessalonians 4 and Matthew 24, if they are talking about the same thing. And I think I've shown that handily. So then, if those two passages are the two passages that talk about the rapture, then we have to say that's, what they say about the rapture has to be our main conclusion. And those two passages seem to lead us to a pre-trib rapture. Now you say, well, there's other passages about the resurrection. Yes, but remember, the argument about the resurrection, about the rapture versus resurrection, is that the rapture is only part of the resurrection. So you can have passages about the resurrection that aren't that aren't necessarily dealing with the rapture. They're just saying when the resurrection is finally finished, it's this. It's at the last day or whatever, because the resurrection begins with Christ at his resurrection, that he's the first fruits. It continues with the rapture and finally finishes at the end. So anyway, the point is then that I think that we've handily dealt with the subject. I think we've done it well, but we're not done. There's more to say. So next month, first Saturday of every month. Oh my goodness! Next month we will not be doing it on the first Saturday. Let's see. Let me give you a date here because I will be out of town on the 3rd. So we'll do the 10th. The 10th of May will be our next live stream. And we're going to do 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians is what is the falling away, the apostasia, and the man of sin and the great delusion. This is the stuff that everybody has an opinion on, and I'm probably going to again make a lot of people angry because I'm going to take a position that is against Tim LaHaye, is against Hal Lindsey, is against old school pre-trib rapture views. But I'm trying to be honest, guys. I'm not trying to get my view, get everyone to believe what I'm believing. I'm trying to honestly deal with these texts, and I think you'll be interested to hear that. So next week we're going to wrap up all of our passages before Revelation. So that's not next week, next month. Next month will be 2 Thessalonians, and then the month after that, which would be June, we're going to get into the book of Revelation, and we're going to start going chapter by chapter through the book of Revelation, building on the foundation that we've already laid. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us, guys. Looking forward to it. I have other slideshow videos, like with the pictures and everything, explaining things that are like this close to being done, and I've just been so swamped the last couple of months. But hopefully to have some of those videos on the trumpet judgments coming out pretty soon in Revelation. So that'll be the trumpet judgments aren't necessarily coming soon, but my video on them will be coming soon. So I wanted to clarify that. Let's pray, and we'll go our ways. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we've had to talk about the rapture and talk about your teaching. Help us to have really sound, solid, biblical Bible study and argumentation and thinking. Help us to learn how to carefully analyze texts of Scripture and think with clarity about them. Help us to be humble about the views that we've chosen and ready to alter them if we find them to be incorrect and out of line with your word. Help us to make your word truly our one guiding principle for our faith and practice. Help us to be sola scriptura in truth. And Lord, I pray that we go from here with our hearts refreshed and warmed, lots to think about, and may we carry this encouragement into our day tomorrow, especially as many of us will be attending church services. We thank you for our churches, and help us to go from here now with your Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray.